The following are two personal accounts detailing apparent crossover events with an alternate version of reality. These so-called encounters with parallel universes are surprisingly common, adding to the extensive list of strange anomalies, often referred to as glitches in the matrix, which challenge our mainstream materialist conceptions of reality. Parallel universe convergence. In late September 2025, Chloe was at work during the early afternoon when her mother sent her a text message. The plan was simple enough. Her mother intended to meet Chloe's sister for lunch. They exchanged a few messages back and forth until her mother stopped responding, which Chloe assumed meant the lunch was underway. She thought nothing more of it until she returned home that evening and heard what had actually transpired. Their apartment in the city was arranged in a straightforward layout. The front door opened into a combined living and dining area. From there, a hallway extended toward the back of the unit, passing first the kitchen, then Chloe's bedroom, then her sister's room, which sat empty most days since her sister had moved to her own place, and finally terminating at their mother's bedroom at the far end. From that back room, their mother could hear activity throughout the apartment, though she had no direct line of sight to the entrance. That afternoon, while waiting in her bedroom for her daughter, Chloe's sister, to arrive, their mother heard exactly what she expected to hear. The front door opened and keys jingled in the familiar rhythm her daughter always made when entering. Then came the soft thud of a purse landing on a chair near the entrance, followed by the rustle of a jacket being removed and draped over the same spot. These were the precise sounds her daughter made every time she visited, a sequence so routine that her mother could have identified her by noise alone. The two cats who had been dozing on the bed reacted immediately. Their ears perked up and they leapt down from the mattress and trotted toward the hallway, just as they always did when someone came home. The animals had recognized these sounds too. The woman's mother waited for the footsteps that should have followed. She expected to hear her daughter walking down the hallway toward her room, perhaps calling out a greeting, but the apartment fell completely silent. There were no footsteps, no voice, and no sound of doors opening or closing, just an empty, expectant quiet that stretched on for several uncomfortable seconds. Puzzled, the mother got up from her bed and walked down the hallway to greet her daughter. She found no one there. The living room was empty. The chair near the entrance held no purse and no jacket. The front door was closed and locked from the inside. The cats stood in the hallway looking confused, as if they too were searching for someone who should have been there but wasn't. Meanwhile, across the city in her own apartment, Chloe's sister was having a very different afternoon. Around noon, she had texted her mother to coordinate the lunch plans. She then set her phone down on her bed and went to take a shower. When she returned to her bedroom, clean and dressed and ready to leave, her phone was gone. She searched with increasing frustration. She stripped the sheets from the bed and shook them out. She moved the mattress. She checked under the furniture and in every corner of her small apartment. She used the Find My iPhone feature from her laptop, and it confirmed that the device was somewhere inside her apartment, but it offered no more specific location than that. The phone seemed to have simply vanished into thin air. After nearly an hour of searching, growing more distressed by the minute, she gave up and called her boyfriend through Discord on her computer. She asked if he had somehow picked up her phone by mistake the last time he visited. He hadn't. She was at a loss. Then, on what must have been her 5th or 6th pass through the bedroom, she found it. Her phone was lying in the centre of her bed, sitting in plain view on the bare mattress. It was positioned exactly where anyone would have noticed it immediately, where she absolutely would have seen it during any one of her previous searches, let alone when she stripped the bedding entirely. Yet there it was, as if it had never been missing at all. When the three women compared notes that evening, the timeline became deeply unsettling. During the precise window when the sister was desperately searching her apartment for a phone that seemed to have slipped out of existence, their mother was hearing her arrive at the family apartment across town. The sounds had been unmistakable. The keys, the purse, the jacket, the door, even the cats had responded to a presence that apparently wasn't there. Chloe tried to make light of it that night, cracking jokes to dispel the unease that had settled over all of them. But in the days that followed, she found herself returning to the incident again and again. The more she considered the details, the more she wondered whether something genuinely inexplicable had occurred. It was as if another version of her sister, one who never lost her phone, who left on time, who actually made it to lunch, had briefly intersected with their reality. For just a few moments, that other sister had arrived home, and their mother and the cats had perceived her presence before the two realities separated again. Whether this constitutes evidence of parallel dimensions momentarily overlapping or some other phenomenon that defies a conventional materialist explanation, Chloe cannot say. She only knows what her mother heard, what her sister experienced, and how perfectly the timing aligned between the two events that should have had nothing to do with each other. 14 years that never happened. In June 2025, a woman named Michaela went to bed after an entirely ordinary day. She had gone to work as usual, followed her normal evening routine, and felt no particular fatigue or stress. She fell asleep at her regular time, expecting nothing more than a typical night's rest. What she experienced instead would fundamentally alter her understanding of dreams, memory, and the nature of consciousness itself. The moment sleep took her, she found herself in a bedroom. Her first sensation was confusion, the mental equivalent of walking into a room and forgetting why you entered. She looked down and saw a man lying with his head in her lap, gazing up at her with a curious expression. Their eyes met, and in that instant, everything shifted into focus. The confusion evaporated, replaced by a complete certainty about who she was, where she was, and what her life entailed. The man was her ex-boyfriend, someone she had dated 14 years earlier in waking life. They had been young then, and the relationship had ended the way many young relationships do, not in catastrophe, but in quiet dissolution, just two people drifting their own ways. She had thought of him occasionally over the years, but he occupied no special place in her memory. He was simply someone she had once known. But in this place, they had never separated. Their relationship had continued uninterrupted, and she possessed a full set of memories documenting that continuation. These weren't vague dream impressions, but detailed recollections, indistinguishable from her real memories. Some of them were actual experiences from their time together in the waking world. Others belonged exclusively to this alternate existence. She accepted all of them as fact without question. What struck her most was the quality of sensation. Michaela had always been a vivid dreamer. She had experienced nightmares about passing away, dreams that bordered on lucid awareness, and even episodes that seemed like out-of-body experiences. She was accustomed to intense emotional content in her sleep, but physical sensation in her previous dreams had always felt muted, a fuzzy approximation of real touch, a dull echo of actual pain. This was different. Every sensation registered with complete fidelity. The weight of his head in her lap, the texture of the sheets, embraces that carried real warmth. As they lay there talking, her boyfriend's demeanour shifted from playful to serious. He looked up at her and said simply, "Let's do this." She asked what he meant. He grew slightly shy, nudging her gently, "Get married." She scolded him for proposing so casually, though she wasn't truly upset. In that moment, all the memories they had built together flooded through her. Years of shared experiences, arguments resolved, quiet evenings, adventures undertaken. She said yes. What followed defied everything she understood about dreams. She didn't skip ahead to significant moments. She didn't experience fragmented scenes separated by gaps. She lived every single day. Dull conversations with co-workers, traffic jams on the commute home, mundane disagreements about household chores. The wedding arrived not as an isolated highlight, but as the culmination of months of planning, stress, and anticipation. She remembered addressing invitations, choosing flowers, arguing about seating arrangements. Then came pregnancy, and with it a transformation she had never imagined possible. Michaela had always been uncertain about motherhood. She had decided that if she ever had children, they would not be biologically hers. She wasn't sure she would ever understand the connection other people described between parent and biological child. She had never considered herself particularly nurturing. Children existed as an abstract concept, something that might or might not figure into her distant future. The birth of her son changed everything. She remembered the moment she first saw him with perfect clarity. Something opened inside her that she could only compare to a flower blooming, a sensation of expansion, of capacity she hadn't known she possessed. The love she felt exceeded anything in her experience. It wasn't like romantic love or love for family or love for friends. It operated on an entirely different scale, occupying a category that hadn't existed for her before that moment. She understood finally why people had children. The question that had puzzled her throughout her adult life suddenly had an answer that required no explanation. It simply made sense in a way that transcended rational argument. She raised her son through every stage of development, first steps and first words, scraped knees and childhood illnesses, his first day of school, birthday parties and holiday gatherings. She watched him grow from infant to toddler to young boy, and she could picture his face at every age with photographic precision. If she possessed any artistic ability, she believed she could have drawn accurate portraits of him at each stage of his development. The years accumulated. She made friends and lost old ones. She attended funerals for people she loved. She celebrated achievements and weathered disappointments. She experienced the full spectrum of human existence, not as a compressed highlight reel, but as a continuous, unbroken sequence of days lived in their entirety. 14 years passed, the same 14 years she had lived in waking life, but along an entirely different path. The life she experienced wasn't her future, it was the life she might have had if she and her boyfriend had never parted. Then, without warning, she woke up. There was no transition, no gradual emergence into consciousness, no sense of the dream fading. One moment she existed in that other life, the next she was sitting bolt upright in her bed. It felt like breaking the surface after being held underwater, a sudden gasping return to a reality she had almost forgotten existed. The grief arrived immediately and with devastating force. She had lost everything: a husband, a home, years of accumulated experience and growth. But more than anything, she had lost her son, a child she had created, nurtured, and loved with an intensity she hadn't known she was capable of feeling, now existed nowhere except in her memory of a place she could never return to. She found herself mourning a life that had never been hers, grieving for a child who had never existed outside a 7-hour window of sleep. The feelings refused to diminish the way dream emotions typically do. Days later, weeks later, the sorrow persisted. She carried within her 14 years of experiences that she couldn't explain to anyone, growth and change that had no corresponding evidence in the waking world. As someone who considered herself rational and scientifically minded, Michaela struggled to make sense of what had happened. Nothing in her understanding of biology, psychology, or the nature of consciousness offered any explanation for how 7 hours of sleep could contain 14 years of continuous lived experience. She searched for others who might have encountered something similar, posting her account on Reddit, hoping that even if answers proved impossible, She might at least find comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. The experience left her fundamentally changed. She now possessed knowledge she had never sought, an understanding of parenthood, of unconditional love, of watching a child grow, that came from a source she couldn't begin to explain. Whether this constituted a glimpse into a parallel existence, some profound capability of the dreaming mind, or something else entirely, she couldn't say. She knew only that for 14 years she had lived another life, and that losing it had broken something inside her that might never fully heal.